Okay, well, the first thing that I'm going to do before we begin is I'm actually going to thank everybody who has tuned into this to listen to this today for sharing your presence with myself and with Seth, our guest today, who I will introduce in just a moment. Because if you've taken time out of your day to listen to this, we hope that some of the wisdom shared today will have a positive and applicable benefit to you, the audience. That's why we're creating this. Applicable being a key word through practice, not just through knowledge. And by sharing Seth's spiritual journey today, the intention really, from my side at least, is to make the spiritual path accessible, relatable, and human for all of you, particularly if any of you listening to this are not sure which direction to go in at the moment, particularly in that sense. So, with that being said, I will say that it's Liam Hartree here, and if you're watching this for the first time, this is episode 470 of the Simply Inspired podcast. Very surreal to say that, but it is true. So, a special number today, guys, and I am very, very honored and blessed to welcome to the show Mr. Seth Monk. Very, very cool name, I must say, and LA's number one meditation teacher, a spiritual teacher and advisor who has learned from some of the best teachers in the world, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, legendary Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and a number of other teachers as well. Seth, as I understand it, is very interested in the integration of, using this term broadly, Eastern and Western forms of healing together in terms of psychology, Buddhism, the connection of those two. He'll have his own definitions for what he does, but let me just say that this is a man who helps a lot of people and touches a lot of lives, helps a lot of people to transform in one way or another. So stay tuned, everyone, and please subscribe to the Simply Inspired channel as well. Otherwise, I will forget to say that because it's the end of my day here. It's the beginning of Seth's day in California, but it's the end of my day in Cyprus. So I'll get that one in there. But Seth, my friend, thank you so much for just making the time for this and just taking time out of your morning to be here. I'm most grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And wow, that's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, it's yeah, 470 now. It's but the podcast has evolved as I have. So I started off as a sports journalist, particularly football journalist. So, I started off interviewing, your world champions and national champions and Olympians and all of this. And as my spiritual journey has evolved, the podcast has evolved. So even though it's a lot of episodes, it's kind of in different phases if you go back and
Yeah.
watch those, some similarities and some big differences. But yeah, 470 today, so you're a special number today.
Neat.
As I mentioned, I mean, I kind of have this twin ambition today to share some of the bigger picture topics of spirituality, but also a little bit about your life. Now, most people will have heard of you, but some won't have. Some will be hearing of you for the first time. You're pretty famous, Seth, so most people will have heard of you. But if anyone is hearing this story for the first time, I would like to touch on really a little bit about your spiritual path, particularly why you started learning the practices and where that came from, because people see where you're at now, kind of up here, but people also need to know that this was started in the same way as them, if that makes sense. So, where did it all begin for you with Buddhism, meditation, all of that kind of thing, please?
Sure. Yeah. Everyone does approach these practices from a different background and, to a different backdrop. Myself, actually, it started as a child, and it wasn't something that was taught to me. It was through my own experiences. I actually had a lot of, I guess, what I would call like paranormal experiences as a kid where I experienced things that had no explanation, that nobody really knew what was happening. And it started this search in me and this deep knowing that there's more going on, that there is almost like a world behind this world in some way. And I always felt that I didn't quite, I don't know, fit in, or that something just didn't fully make sense. And I also was coming of age when, bands like Nirvana or like Rage Against the Machine, or there is a message in the 90s when I was growing up of, we don't want to do the same thing that our parents did. This is probably happens every generation, but this thing that, we don't want to just go and get jobs and sit in a cubicle and movies like Office Space and Fight Club. And, so a lot of the media at the time was also reflecting the same message to me, almost like a generational anger at this world that we were seeing before us that we didn't really want to inherit. And we wanted to find a different way to do things. And, I searched in art and I searched in philosophy and I looked for different ways to find answers. And I had the luck or the karma of meeting a monk, that a monk actually came to my college and gave a talk. And it was at that same time that I was just getting into spirituality, that I had friends teaching me about meditation and energy healing, and it was this confluence of different things that all kind of came to a head. And I met this monk, and it just clarified for me, and it said, "Oh, that's what I'm looking for. This is it. It's spirituality." And and it's more than just spirituality, but it was a grounded spirituality. So what I love about Buddhism specifically, as the Dalai Lama talks about it, there is Buddhism, the religion, right? The story of the Buddha and this kind of belief system. But then there's Buddhism, the practice. And that's for everybody. That's something that, Western culture has very well succeeded at stripping away all of the religious, underpinnings of it, and just took the practices and teach the practices. And that's why there's, mindfulness and meditation in hospitals and in schools and in corporate offices, and that a lot of these practices are just applicable to humanity. Buddhism is a science of how the mind works. And that has just been so incredibly helpful. So, I graduated college and I didn't know what I wanted to do per se. And so this monk invited me to the monastery, and I went there and I realized, this is the place to be. That it makes sense just to stay here and learn. And the monastery was in Germany. It was a Vietnamese monastery in Germany. And so I just stayed there and was working on myself. And when I started meditating, my life flashed before my eyes, right? So every every unprocessed memory from my past came rushing forward to be seen and heard and felt. And over time, as I started, processing all of that stuff, and um, even grouping it, this is also very important, that starting to see, oh, all of these memories, they're all attached to this one theme. And all of these memories are attached to this one theme. And as I shift those themes, it kind of resolves those memories and changes my life. This little bit of how meditation also can be a bridge to to change our behaviors. But I slowly started realizing that I can now also help other people with this. And so I also then began teaching, started teaching weekly classes and was teaching also young people. And it kind of shifted. There was this, arc where it went from just being about my own healing journey to actually me stepping into the role of supporting others in their journeys. And I left the monastery in 2014 and did a 2-year trip, mostly in India, a little bit in Australia, and then came back to the US. And for the last, I guess, almost 10 years now, it's been a journey of how to integrate, how to share this knowledge with the world, who is living very differently than a monk lives, and has different value systems and priorities, and finding what works and what's applicable and what doesn't, and how can these practices help people in their daily lives, because if if people cannot be directly, influenced and receive direct benefit from this, then it's useless. Then it's just things that sound good, but it needs to actually have a function. So that's kind of been my mission, is how to help people, um, almost just from a humanitarian standpoint, and strip back any spiritual or religious understandings, and just person to person, understanding how the mind works, how the heart works, how life works. and seeing what people need. And that's been kind of my journey for the last 10 years.
Wow, that is awesome. Very eloquent description, very relatable. I relate to a lot of what you said there, and many other people will as well, which is why I wanted to start with that. The humanization, the transformation of the heart, the mind, these things, I mean, absolutely incredible. Now, one other thing I would like to touch on briefly there, though, because you have explained the journey, but you've been very humble about one thing, which is, as I understand it, you have learned from some of the best, because when I was reading on your website, it says there about His Holiness Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh. There's some others mentioned, I believe, and I would like to touch on that just because people will be very interested. It's
Sure.
extraordinary, and so yes, may you share the story of what it was like to learn from some of those people, please. Thank you.
Yeah, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I've met him, or maybe I've seen him about, 15 times throughout my life. And that could be, as simple as just him passing in a car in India to, doing an hour interview with him or going to a week-long teaching of his. So, um, most of my teachings from him have been while he's teaching a larger audience of people, but we have had some personal meetings. Thich Nhat Hanh, I lived with his community in Plum Village for a few months, and my residence was right next to his, like my hut was next to his hut. So every morning I'd come out and Thich Nhat Hanh, is just walking in front of me to the meditation hall. And um, yeah, and it was really beautiful. I mean, one of my other teachers, Dhammadippa, he would say, being around these great masters, he said, you learn through osmosis. It's even if you don't remember a lot of what they said, you just start to pick it up just by being around them, by watching how they function, by seeing how they embody their practices and their wisdom. His Holiness is really amazing at embodying joy, childlike joy, and compassion, and pairing it with this insight that he has. And Thich Nhat Hanh's approach, he was really focused on presence, and the understanding that through being just present, really deeply present, and looking deeply and seeing how everything's connected, we can really understand the world and understand ourselves. And each teacher that I practice with, another teacher, Ajahn Brahm, who was in a Thai forest monastery in Australia, his whole practice was meditation. And through reaching the deepest states of meditation, and everything else kind of just dissolves away, you really see what is you and what's not you, what is real and what's not real. And it's really cool that, every person has a different flavor, if that makes sense, that they all are very awakened beings, very, enlightened beings, but they all express it in these very different ways. It's like a bouquet of flowers, and each one has its very unique smell and its unique color and its unique textures. Um, and I feel very, yeah, blessed to have learned from, Zen monks and from Tibetan monks and from Thai monks, and to really have connected to all of the different traditions of Buddhism, to also see, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what do they prioritize. And it's also, yeah, just allowed me to see the fuller picture of Buddhism and Buddhist practice, and again helping me to bridge that over to people in the West who maybe don't have any connection to Buddhism whatsoever.
Absolutely, I love that. I mean, as you say there, the going to the roots of the traditions, but then also bringing them into the modern day. I love that. Plus, hearing about what those guys are like firsthand. I mean, absolutely incredible and wonderful teachers. So, okay, now as we move forward into this, one of the things or one of the challenges that I'd imagine you have faced, you touched on this earlier already, the integration aspect. I've touched on it. You've touched on it. Really bringing this to people if they want to explore the traditions and the Eastern elements, the religious elements more, that's cool. But bringing it also into the secular world, if you like, and making that palatable for people is a very interesting challenge. It takes a lot of nuance and a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, trial and error, self-discovery, all of these things. I would like to go a little bit deeper into the process of you doing that and adapting the teachings to the West. And as you may have noticed, I'm not really a big fan of using the term the East and the West because it applies division, and I don't believe in that. But
For sure. Yeah.
there are differences. Obviously, there are some, but there's a lot of similarities. Even so, basically, taking this to the US and other places around the world, what were some of the challenges that you faced in terms of integrating this into secular daily life? And how did you overcome those challenges? What did you learn from them? I think that's very valuable. And then from there, we'll move into a few of the bigger picture topics. But that's
Yeah.
really important to mention, I feel.
I mean, it really came down to me having to, I would say, embody the practices and understand them deeply. Um, there was a philosopher that once said, you don't really understand your field of expertise unless you can explain it to the person behind the bar serving you drinks. So if you really understand the thing that you do, if you really understand the thing that you research, the thing you practice, you should be able to very clearly and easily bridge that over to anybody that you meet on the street. And if your words are too like too specialized or too complex, and it leaves people staring at you blankly, then it means that you're still trapped in these structures, logical structures, and you're not actually able to, be free within the understanding. So for myself, one of the things that helped was that I work with kids a lot. I worked in schools, and you have to use a whole different kind of language when you work with kids. You have to really express things differently. You have to find ways to help them understand without dumping a bunch of concepts on them. And there's also something to be said about, the scientific approach to things and how science has studied meditation at length now. It has studied these practices and it shows what it does for the brain. It shows what it does for your wellness. When you go to the doctor and you're stressed, the doctor will suggest meditation now. That wasn't real 20 years ago. So there is now scientific data backing this stuff, which is nice. So it doesn't sound like just some kind of, you know, um, woo. Like my mom used to talk about the Hare Krishnas, like walking through New York and stuff, right? Um, that, there's an actual scientific backing and that, there's whole realms of psychology that now blend mindfulness and meditation into them. And it's being really accepted by the scientific community, which is helpful because then you can come at it from that point of view versus from a religious point of view, right? Um, myself, it gets really simple, actually. It gets really simple. It's just you look at yourself and you look at your life and you say, what is working, what is not working. Am I happy generally? Am I unhappy generally? Are there places that feel stuck or blocked or unclear? Do I have a path forward or not? Do I understand what's going on? What is my relationship to my situation? There's overlaps with life coaching stuff in there. Like so I do coaching as well. I do life coaching. So I take all this and I connect it in there. Um, but there's really something to be said about, um, you know, meditation. Meditation teaches you to to hold presence and to hold space and to not need to be so reactive to everything. Meditation allows you to have perspective, and through the presence that it builds, you can respond to things versus just reacting to things. And when people look back through their lives, they can often see ways in which their reactivity made a situation worse. That they said things they didn't want to say, that they hurt people they didn't want to hurt, that they did things that were stupid, right, or harmful. And even if you just bring up some of that for people and say, hey, how different would your life be or have been if you really could have just taken a breath before you said that thing or did that thing? The Buddha said, um, you know, you could burn down a whole forest with just one match. Just one word or act spoken or said in anger can destroy a whole relationship. And I think people can really relate to that. People can really relate to if they examine their own lives, they can see ways in which they would have benefited to have taken a breath, to have slowed down, to have, you know, had that moment to reflect. And what I was saying earlier too is, so when I was on those meditation retreats and I was having all those memories coming up, I had arguments with people that I had had like 10 years ago still playing out in my mind. Like I was sitting there and I was still fighting somebody in my own mind. And I was like, all right, what is this? Why am I doing this? And I noticed, in that situation, I didn't set a boundary. I didn't say no when I wanted to say no. And so I was still carrying resentment. I was like, huh. And then later, another situation came up and I was like, there it is again. I didn't say no. And then I started seeing a bunch of these situations and I said, wow, I don't say no. I don't actually set boundaries. And therefore, I'm carrying all of this psychic debris from past situations. And then in my real life, when a new situation came, I'd be like, oh, yeah, you're allowed to say no. And I'd say no. And suddenly I started feeling safe and I started feeling protected. And all of those situations from the past, they started to dissolve because I had now healed this theme. And I started to feel more grounded in myself. Right. And suddenly it's like, ah, wow, now I feel relaxed. I can protect myself. Right. And that's just one example. When we can examine our own life, we start to see these different themes that we need to work on. Often I hear people say, like, why am I in another relationship like this? Right? Why is this happening to me again? Right? Every time you hear someone say that, why is it happening to me again? Whether it's their relationship, it's their job, it's just their life circumstances. Great question. Why do things happen to us again and again? And it's at some point our responsibility to look at ourselves and say, yes, why, Seth, why is that happening to you again? How is it that you are, responsible for these situations repeating themselves? What are my beliefs? What are my perceptions? What are my behaviors? You know, what is the way that I'm identifying with myself and with the outside world? How am I creating this reality? Can I take full ownership of my experience? And this is everything. Like I said, this is also when it dips into life coaching a little bit because I hear some of the same things. But that's the Buddha talked about this too, right? It's karma. That's the definition of karma. It's just what are the results of my actions? And do my actions produce results that feel good to me? Or are my actions producing results that don't feel good? And if the things I'm doing make me feel not good, then it's my responsibility to choose a new path. And it's very straightforward stuff. It's very simple. It's very clear. But it's for some reason people don't take that moment to just stop and reflect and look at themselves and look at their lives and look at their choices and look at their behaviors and choose differently. Choose something that feels more aligned with them, that moves them in the direction they want to go. Right. So a lot of Buddhism and I was a monk, so I didn't really say that part. Right. So I was an ordained Buddhist monk for 8 years in this monastery. So it was pretty much my whole 20s was me as a monk. And a big part of that was learning how to live in a different way, how to live in a way that I feel proud of myself, that when I reflect back over my day, it leaves me feeling happy. It leaves me feeling like I've done good in this world. I've helped people. And that gives me a sense of peace. And through that sense of peace, the mind naturally starts to almost dip into meditation because I feel good. And when you feel good, you're just here and present. And this is what I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh, right? It's just present moment, wonderful moment. When you're here and you feel good, then it's just easy to the drop to meditate calms the nervous system, calms the brain. And the more that you're here and the more that you relax, then the more you can understand things and you can see what are the things that pull you out of that state, that pull you out of your center, and what are the things that are conducive to it and that help support you feeling happy, you feeling buoyant, you feeling uplifted in your life, and you start choosing differently. You start choosing things that are more supportive for you, and you start releasing things that are harmful for you, right? And you brick by brick start building a new reality, a new life for yourself. And that's something when I work with clients, that's what it's a big part of it is really just shifting and creating this a new life, a new reality that they then get to relate to that gives new feedback to them, right? And then I hear often not why is this happening to me again? I now hear more and more from people like, oh my God, this is new. This is a new quality of boyfriend or girlfriend that's coming into my life. This is a new quality of opportunities for my work. I just reacted to that situation in a whole new way than I've ever done before. There's the story like I was walking down the road and there was a hole and I fell in the hole. And then I was walking down the same road the next day and the same hole was there and I fell in it again. And then I was walking down the same road the next day and the hole was there and I remember the hole was there and I still fell in it. And I was walking down the same road the next day and there's the same hole and I tried to walk around it and then I still fell in it. And then I was walking down the same road the next day and the same hole was there and I was walking around it and I got around it. And then the next day I just chose a different road. And that's that slow incremental path of watching it happen again and again and again and again and again, and then finally just choosing something else.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. I love the story. I love the analogy there. But the whole thing, I mean, the themes, what you said about the themes, that is incredible wisdom. I've experienced that firsthand, so I know how well it works. But by the way, but for people listening to this, yeah, I mean, that is massive shift in the patterns, being aware of the patterns to change our trajectory. And yeah, I mean, people doing what they've always done, one of the most toxic places to be. So changing that is profound. I love that you work with kids as well, by the way, because I just picked up on that mentally because people can change at any time, and I think it's wonderful. It's never too late. Also, though, actually helping them to stop falling in the hole anytime and just walk around it or choose a different road, before they get there is very, very, very wonderful as well. Now, there's another aspect to this though that kind of centers on you and kind of doesn't. But in your role as a teacher, you obviously continue to develop and you obviously continue the practices very much. And I ask that because, I'm sitting here and going all the way back to what you said earlier. You sit down with these great teachers and you can tell, right? And people say that to me. They say, well, how do you know who to interview? And it's like, well, I can tell if they're genuine because of the energy and, all the things you were speaking about. And even as we're talking today, I'm learning. So, you are embodying the practices very well. But that leads me to the continuation of that process. In other words, and I do mean this respectfully, but in other words, you're up there now and you're very well known and you're very well established and people come to you for advice. But you stay humble, you stay centered, you continue to embody the practices. Now, this might sound really obvious because you might be thinking, well, yeah, I mean, people do that. People like Thich Nhat Hanh, they never wavered from it. So, His Holiness, so you will as well. But still, I think people will be really interested because people are looking for, how do I find the right teacher for me? How do I find an authentic teacher? How do I know if we will resonate together, if I can open up with them? All of these things that go through your mind, especially in the beginning. And, that first monk you met when you went to Germany, I'm sure it went through your mind of, this guy, maybe there's something about him I like, but am I ready to take this step? And so, if you understand the connection I'm making, the way that you continue to embody the practices and never get lost in, a busy schedule, being famous, being too attached to your role as a teacher in the first place, which is obviously, you have to kind of stay separate from that and connected to be good at it. It's a long question, I'm sorry, but does that make sense where I'm going with that topic, Seth? And what are your thoughts on that, please?
What is your question?
Good question. So basically, how you stay centered and continue to embody the practices no matter how much success you get, because you are in a lot of worldly influences where you're basically famous. People are coming to you for answers for all sorts of things. I'm sure also on the flip side of that, it gets very crazy busy for you and you still have to maintain time to practice. So my question is really that. I mean, it's one thing when you're in a monastery, it's one thing when you're starting out, but when you're established, to continue to perfect your practice to be of the best form of service is something that you obviously do. You obviously do that. That's why I said, I mean this respectfully, but I'm curious how you do that, because it's easy to rest on your laurels, and say, well, I know this now, but you're obviously continuing to evolve and adapt. So that's
Sure.
the direction I'm going in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's part of the learning experience too. So I was talking with one of my clients yesterday and we were talking about relationships, and I was telling her like, listen, like a relationship, every relationship you are ever in for the rest of your life is a work in progress. Every single relationship that you are in will always be changing and always be evolving because you're changing and the other person's changing and you're learning new information, you're making new experiences, you're processing new things. So every single relationship you have forever will always be an evolving, living, active process. So the same thing can be said about, myself and my relationship to my world and my life. As new situations happen, then there's new lessons to be learned. There's new challenges, there's new gains, there's new pitfalls, right? If everything's working out and everything's great, and then I'm like, oh, I can just rest now and I don't have to do so much, then eventually I'll be like, wait a minute, that's its own kind of challenge, you know what I mean? And so it's just that constant reflection. One of my teachers, Ajahn Brahm, he was saying that, he had disciples come to him and they said, we're having a child. We don't want to tell our child to be a Buddhist, but like, what do we, but, we've gotten so much from this, but how should we navigate that? And he said, well, don't think about Buddhist or not Buddhist. Just tell the child there's only two things that you need to do. And one is you need to be just completely honest. Just be completely honest to your experience. And the second thing is to always ask questions and to look deeper. And he said, if you're always asking questions and looking deeper and you're always honest about what you're finding, then that's Buddhism anyway.
Mm.
And that is something that has stuck with me as well, that, I'm by nature just an interested and curious person. And at the end of the day, it's like when we are suffering, when we're off center, we start to feel it. It starts to become heavy. It gets dense. There becomes stress. The alarm bells go off slowly at first, and then they get louder. And eventually it's, oh, okay, wow, there's a pivot. I need to shift. Something's a little bit off here. But I kind of feel that there's a flip side to that where, as I teach a lot and I'm working with people, new lessons are coming through in real time as I work with people in their minds and what they're going through. And it's kind of interesting, but there's a lot of growing that I go through while guiding other people as well, because I'm seeing parts of myself in them and I'm seeing different, you know, again, you were saying nuance, all these nuanced kind of things going on that allows me to see new perspectives and I grow and I learn through working with other people as well. And at the end of the day, um, the Buddha gave a teaching and it was called the simile of the heartwood. And he said, if you went to a tree and you wanted just like that really good, like solid wood at the center of that tree to build with, but you went to the tree and you just collected the leaves and walked away, you know, would that satisfy you needing the wood from the tree? And the monks were like, no. And he's like, what if you just got the branches and walked away? Would that give you that nice wood to build with? And they're like, no. He's like, what if you ripped off the bark? They're like, no. He's like, what if you took the outer part of the wood? And they're like, no. He's like, all right, what if you actually went in and got the wood? And they're like, yes. And he said, just so, you know, a monk that just takes my teachings, doesn't practice them or apply them, but just takes my teachings and tells other people about them. He goes, that's like someone who just takes the leaves and gives them out. They just take the covering. You know, someone that dresses like a monk but doesn't practice the teachings, that's someone who's like just taking the bark, who's just taking the outside part and saying, look, I'm this thing. Someone that practices a little bit, but then throws them away, that's like the outside part of the wood. And then he's like, but what we're going for is to get that inner part, right? People that really are practicing it deeply to embody it, to become it. That's the point. And everything else is not helpful. It's not helping other people, it's not helping yourself. And I think that is kind of what it comes down to. And ideally, when you see these really great Buddhist masters and spiritual teachers in general, their practice is just their way of life. Their practice is who they are. There's your brain changes. You have a different experience of reality, and that's kind of unshakable. It just becomes who you are. It integrates into you. Um, and it really comes down to intention. When you see spiritual teachers that create cults, right? Or abuse or mislead their followers or whatever. It's that there's parts of them that are more interested in power, parts of them that are more interested in position and ownership and possession of a thing. And and that's why the whole thing kind of crumbles and collapses on them, because it's still ego. It's still kind of based in fear and greed.
Mm,
If you have somebody that's genuine in their pursuit, like a Thich Nhat Hanh, who it's just this very deep and genuine, wish to make these experiences and to share them with others, that they may also make these experiences and to heal. It stays about the other person. It stays in a place of service. And then however famous you get, however big you get, it doesn't matter, because you're doing it from a place of service. And when the fires just happened here in Los Angeles, I ended up starting a whole, like, spontaneously drove to the next town, and I started a headquarters there and helped create a whole supply line. And I was the base of operations for 2 weeks, bringing supplies in and giving them out to people and managing things. And just took on this role all of a sudden, you know, um, of being a like a almost like a smuggler, like helping supplies go in and out through the police checkpoints and making sure like the elderly people are getting their food, and managing all these people who are in a very high stressful situation, and making sure that the police and firemen were fed. And you know it it just happened all of a sudden because I was available, right? I was available. I was in a place of service. I could see the needs. I wasn't getting stuck in the trauma and the stress responses. So I was able to assume naturally that role and to serve the community. Outwardly, that thing that I did has nothing, doesn't look like Buddhism, doesn't look like being a monk. But because of the embodiment of those practices, it allowed me to take that role. It allowed that all to happen very seamlessly for me, because I had developed the right traits within myself to be able to keep a high level, to manage things, to not get so caught up. And that for me is kind of the point. Um, how can we integrate these things? How can we become these teachings in a way that you can put us in any situation? The Dalai Lama prays every morning, and he said, may I be food for the hungry. May I be a bridge for those who need to cross over. May I be a blanket for the cold. You know, um, the Bodhisattva prayer, like, how can I, as a person, be of service and give others whatever it is they need? And it's not about giving them what I want to give them, right? If I was just a meditation teacher, Buddhist monk, and there's fires going, and I was like, maybe we should all just sit and breathe, people would be like, we need what? That you need to be able to release your role and respond in real time to the situation, whatever is needed. to be, don't even be attached to the identity. Because if you're attached to the identity of being a teacher or a leader, like a monk, whatever it is, there's the whole shadow side of that. There's going to be moments where your response is then completely tone deaf to what's actually needed. So even being free from your roles and your identity to the point where you're just present, you're in service, and you're doing what's needed, what's right, what's necessary, what's virtuous, and you can let your conscience be your guide. Your heart knows.
Oh, that is wonderful, Seth. That is a wonderful description, and thank you so, so much because the reason that is so valuable, one of several reasons, but people say, oh, be the change that you wish to see in the world and all of those kinds of things, which is very true, one of my favorite quotes. But at the same time, what you've outlined there is actually how to get there, is actually how to do that process, or not even do that process, but be that process, as I've said, the whole point. So I think that is immensely valuable. I mean, we obviously started off with, as I mentioned, how to find the right teachers, and yeah, you've answered that, but it goes much deeper into how to actually embody the change that you wish to see, the service that you wish to give, all of those things. Absolutely incredible. Now, I'm aware of your time over there, mindfully aware always. Funny enough, my mindfulness reminder's just gone off as well. Sorry if you can hear that, but I will also say very very quickly before you go, because I know you have a client shortly. A couple of things. I mean, if people would like to reach out to you and connect with you, you're not exactly hard to find by any means, but nonetheless, your accessibility is wonderful, because I am going to say that not everybody, when I reach out for interviews, when I reach out for learning, anything like that, I mean, the responses do vary. So the fact that you really have the time and the presence from everything we've just said to embody that is very, very valuable. But you also need to give yourself an ethical plug basically on here, because people hearing this for the first time, some of them will listen and take it away that way. But I think some people will feel, okay, actually, I want to reach out to Seth. So how do they do that? What's the best way to reach you, basically?
Yeah, so my website, sethmonk.com, is an easy way. You can connect to me on Instagram, Seth Monk, and shoot me a message there. I also lead, I do one-on-one work with people. I lead trips to India every year. So I'm actually leading a trip to Holy Buddhist sites of India this October, which is on my website. And also, if you want to go onto Spotify and you type in, Seth Monk, might be Seth Infinity Monk on there. I have about 200 talks on meditation and the mind, and they're free. So even if you just want to listen to, hundreds of hours of me talking about this stuff, that's all there for you on Spotify. But yeah, if you'd like to work together with me, directly, then definitely check out my website, sethmonk.com, send me a message. Yeah, and I'd love to meet some of you. I'd love to hear who's out there and what resonated with you from this talk, and I love to support people. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely, and that really comes over, Seth. That's why I've mentioned that. I'm very excited to see what else you will develop in these teachings as well, because if you look at somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh, you look at him when he was so much younger, or His Holiness, any of these people, and even what they were doing at that time. It's I can see a correlation there with the amazing work you're doing now. But you map that forward a few years, I mean, there's going to be some incredible initiatives, especially because we have to remain flexible in life. So, like what you said about the fires, big respect for that, by the way, and helping people there. I'm sure other opportunities. I hope you do more with the written word as well. I've seen poems and I've seen things, but definitely books and things. I mean, it's still very important. So I hope that there'll be more with that. But yes, I wish you the best of luck with everything further in the future, but also today in the present moment. As you go through your day, I hope that it really goes well for you, because you've obviously got the whole day to go, and I'm finishing mine. And last but not least, thank you again for sharing this presence, not only just for giving a great talk, because you did that, but for just um, speaking from the heart. I mean, so much from in here. I could feel it. Everything you were saying, I could feel it so deeply, the resonance and the power. So, yes, thank you for that. And I am most grateful for your time.
Thanks, brother. It's a pleasure.
It sure was. Thank you. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.